Hi guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the Hohem iSteady Multi. Now this 3-axis gimbal is not only useful for smartphones and action cameras, but it's also compatible with small compact cameras, such as the Sony RX100, which is the camera that I use always to record my videos. Now, the gimbal can be found for around £170 in the UK and $170 in the US. Links will be down in the description below in case you're interested. So without further ado, let's get into this review. So first off, I want to touch on what you actually get in the box. So you can see over here there's the gimbal itself, and I'll get into that in just a bit. But you get a nice little carrying pouch, which is not only fits for the gimbal, but it also means that you can place, let's say, a little action camera over here, or even if you have nothing inside, you can place your compact camera like the RX100. Now there's a pretty comprehensive manual inside. There is a small stand as well, which attaches at the bottom of the gimbal if you so wish. You've also got a little screw, which is useful for screwing in appliances such as your camera or, let's say, a smartphone mount. You've got the Sony multifunctional cable. Now I will note that I have got the Sony RX100 MK1, the original. This only works with the MK2 and above, so therefore if you do have the original like myself, this will not work. And the reason you'll want these, you want this if you have a newer Sony RX100, is simply because you can adjust the pan tilt control on the gimbal, which I'll show you in just a bit. You've got an Allen key and also micro USB to USB charging cable, which is used for the gimbal. So moving on to the gimbal itself, what you'll see over here is that the gimbal has a variety of different functions. Now the Sony controls I mentioned over here is the zoom controls that you can see over here, and also the fact that you can start and stop recording directly from the gimbal itself without having to touch your camera. And there's a trigger button at the bottom, at the back as well. The trigger button, once pressed once, essentially is for sport mode, so you can enable and disable sport mode. And if you double tap it, it kind of recalibrates the gimbal. So, for example, brings it back into a sort of center position. Now the joystick control over here allows you to move the actual gimbal itself. You'll be able to see over here in a video that it can move left and right and up and down, which is great. These tilt controls can be customized through the app, which I'm going to show you in just a bit, but it's worth noting that function is quite useful for those who are interested in it. So you've also got a button over here, and the button, what it does is denotes what sort of way that the gimbal operates. So you've got PF, which stands for pan following, PTF, which is pan tilt following, AL, which is all lock, so essentially all locking in every direction, and you've got AF, which is all following, and inception as well. Now these are denoted in the manual, but you'll be able to see over here that depending on the setting that you use, the gimbal will react to that. So it's worth bearing in mind depending on the way you like to film, and also in terms of your style as well, because this is different sort of filmography styles as well, so it's purely subjective. Now moving on from the controls, it's worth noting that the gimbal has a 1/4 inch screw on the left hand side and also underneath as well, which is great because it allows you to attach them either to a tripod or if you want to attach something next to it. So the one on the side would be naturally used for an additional light, for example, so you'd mount a light so you can then have your camera and light all in one hand, and then at the bottom is the one that you'd want to put it to a tripod, so therefore you can have it standing if you want to do some vlogging. Now on the left hand side there's a little latch, and the latch essentially gives you 2 different ports. Now the USB type A port is used for transmitting power from the gimbal to your device, in other words providing it charge. So for example, if I want to charge my smartphone while using the gimbal, I can do that. Now do bear in mind that the 4000 milliamp battery does last around 12 hours. That's the quoted time, at least from what I've found. I've used it for about 2 to 3 hours at least today, and it hasn't even dropped from one single bar, and you can find that out if you do press the power button. You can see there's 4 little LEDs which light up on the right hand side. If you do need to recharge it, it will take about 2 to 3 hours to charge. There's a micro USB port over here, worth bearing that in mind if you need to charge it, and as I said, there's the cable provided in the box. So now in terms of operating the gimbal, it's pretty simple, but I just do want to show you this because it is going to take a little bit of trial and error for you to adjust it, and really what they say is that the device should be somewhat balanced when you are having it without the gimbal being actually on. But nevertheless, it's just worth bearing in mind that you've got different adjustments. You've got this arm, which basically moves the entire platform left and right. You've got this one over here, which moves the platform up and down. And then you've also got this little button and this, which essentially move the device forward and backward. So here in this case, I've got my smartphone simply because I am recording with my Sony RX100, so I can't show you that. What's beautiful about this gimbal is that these little numbers around here on the side. So therefore, if you do know your device relatively well, you'll know that, okay, I need to adjust it to, I don't know, 1.3 or something like that. And therefore allows you to make it a little bit easier to go ahead and adjust it. So now, right now, it's not quite correct. Let's see what happens when I turn on the gimbal. You can see it's okay and it's turned on properly, but you can hear there's potentially a noise in the background. That's because it's not really being calibrated for the phone. Instead, I've used it for my for my camera. So anyway, worth bearing that in mind, that if you do get it, not say wrong, but the gimbal will not like it. So now, in terms of actually calibrating the gimbal, there is a few different problems that I found with the operation of it. And that was mainly because when I had a lighter object, specifically an action camera, it was quite hard to actually get the calibration right on. In other words, I was getting a little bit of motor noise and the gimbal just wasn't liking something that was quite light. Now, your mileage may vary. I've seen loads of different people having plenty of success with either an action camera or a smartphone. In my case, the best sort of scenario was when I was actually using Sony RX100, where it worked pretty much flawlessly. However, I do want to make sure that you are aware of this, and more so the fact that when you do initially get it, don't give up. And by that I mean, I had it for about half an hour at first, and I was pretty disappointed because the gimbal was just going crazy. It just did not like the calibration I had with the Sony RX100. It was spinning it constantly, and when I was trying to connect up to the app, it would just refuse to do so, even though it should just work. And after watching guides and asking even manufacturer for some advice as to how to set it up, it just basically worked on its own. I then switched it on a couple of days later when I just decided, okay, let me go and try it again, and suddenly the gimbal magically worked. Since then, I haven't had any issues, but it's worth bearing in mind that it isn't exactly flawless and sometimes can be a bit tricky to set up and just does require a little bit of extra patience when it comes to actually setting it up. And I did want to make sure that I'm very honest and very clear about that in terms of my own experience, because it wasn't flawless out the box and completely pain-free. Now, based on that, it's also worth drawing your attention to the app. So in terms of the app, it's called the Hohem Global App, and you can see you can connect all the other different ones that you want, but here it's the iSteady Multi. If I connect a device, and you'll be able to see over here, I just click on it, it should come up. As I said before, sometimes it does not come up, and at which point can be a little bit infuriating. Now, in terms of the control, you can control the actual gimbal itself. You can see the battery life as well, and you can switch the modes which I mentioned before. So for example, pan follow, tilt follow, and whatever. In terms of calibrate, you can also calibrate it straight through the app, which I would suggest it's a little bit better than calibrating it manually. In terms of the settings, these are what are going to be more interesting to people, because this allows you to kind of fine tune certain elements. So for example, the joystick speed. So if you want it to tilt or pan at a certain speed, you can do that through the app. You can see I've got pretty much on the lower settings because I like a slower type of pan and tilt function. However, your mileage may vary. You might prefer a much faster one, and therefore you can adjust it, and it does adjust on the fly. So if, for example, if you were to adjust it, it would then automatically update the gimbal as soon as you do that. Then also there is another option over here, the more options ones, and this is also a very important menu. It's the motor's torsion. Now this is essentially down to the noise. If you hear a bit of noise, you'd want to adjust the torsion so that the motors are not as worked up, let's say. The lower you go, in my case, I found it to be a better sort of success, if that makes sense, with the motor noise, and so much so that when I had it at 36, 44, and 46, 6, it would completely eliminate any sort of noise when it came to using it with my RX 100. So I was very much impressed with that, and the fact that I couldn't actually hear any of the motor noise was very impressive, and it's worth bearing that in mind. Other than that, in terms of the more section, you can update the firmware. You can see right now on the latest firmware, at least at the time of making this video. So now it comes on to performance, the most important element of this gimbal. Does it actually perform how it should do? Well, I will be able to say that I'm very impressed with the actual overall performance. Once you've got it calibrated and everything's right, once you just stick on your camera that you're used to in terms of the setting as well, the gimbal does perform very well. So you'll be able to see over here a video with the RX 100, and given the fact that my RX 100 doesn't have any sort of image stabilization, it was pretty obvious in terms of what the gimbal did in terms of the overall video quality. It was a lot more steady, and specifically when I started running, it became a lot steadier and just so much better of an image. I did also run it through a different device. So I ran it through my Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, and my phone has image stabilization built in. So it's got electronic image stabilization. Now, smartphones aren't the best in the world. Some of them are better than others. In my case, my Samsung does a relatively good job. You can see the differences, however, when I do look at the camera itself and use sort of the, not the front-facing camera, but when I'm looking at myself, and you can see the background is a little bit more shaky versus when the gimbal is being used. And then finally, I actually used a GoPro Hero 7 Black. Now the GoPro Hero 7 Black has hyper smooth stabilization, one of the base stabilization or electronic image stabilizations I've ever come across, specifically on an action camera. And here the differences were very minute. There is very small differences. However, again, when I started running, you see a little bit of jitter when it came to the Hero 7 stabilization versus when I was using Hero 7 stabilization plus the gimbal on top of that. It meant that it was super silky and super smooth, which meant that essentially the gimbal was doing its job. No matter what sort of device I was using, action camera, smartphone, or specifically a compact camera, it was all really, really impressive. So what's my verdict on the iSteady Multi? Well, I must say I was pleasantly surprised. Given the fact that this gimbal does work across a smartphone, action camera, and a compact camera, it meant it's pretty versatile and allows me to take either of these devices pretty easily, be it through its case or let's say in my hand, and actually have really nice stabilized video. Yes, some devices such as the GoPro Hero 7 Black have fantastic stabilization, but this takes it another step forward. For me, the most interesting fact was that it works with my compact camera. Compact camera that does not have stabilization, and without it looks very shaky. So if I'm trying to do some B-roll, I have to be really steady with my hand. But now when I can use the gimbal, I don't even have to worry about tilting or panning around and not having to worry about a stabilized B-roll. So this will work beautifully on product shots, but specifically I'm going to be doing more car reviews on my car review channel, Totally EV, so make sure you check that out in the description below. And that will allow me to do better pans across the cars. So be it from the front or the inside of the car, it just allows me to do much better B-roll shots. On top of that, I'm someone who likes dancing, and it's something of a hobby of mine. And here I was able to have my fiance with no sort of camera experience knowledge shoot a video relatively simply with holding the gimbal and just panning around myself while I was doing some dancing. So this was really cool, and it allows it to give me a different sort of take and kind of ups my video game. So if it's something that you guys are looking for, I think the £170 investment or $170 investment will be very much up your street. It's not for everyone, and the investment I do appreciate is a little bit extra given the fact that some compact cameras might cost as much as that. But if you're looking to take your video filming and your editing to another level, I'd say that this gimbal really does add that extra element. And the fact that you can use it across 3 different type of device types gives you that extra range of creativity. So there we have it. That's been my honest, unpaid, unbiased review. If you like this type of content, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and favorite and share if you find that this review will be helpful for someone looking into buying this gimbal. Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. Take care and bye-bye.